Welcome, my friends, to another exciting round of deck techs with Alkadron. I am really excited to share some exciting new tech for you today. I'm recording on January 4th, 2022. Tomorrow, I'm gonna hop on a train and take myself to the PALS studio where I'm gonna play some games with them. And in honor of that occasion, I have some special new decks. These decks are surprises for the pals, so I've been very carefully not talking about them in the PDH Homebase Discord, which is taken a lot of self-control, but it also means that I'm very, very excited to talk to you now about it. So let's dive right in. This is my build for Vega, the Watcher. When this card first came out, well, let's talk about what she does before I talk about what I'm doing with her. Vega is an Azorius flavored 3 mana 2/2 with flying. She's a very talented bird, pretty average as far as bodies go. It's pretty average for a bird. She's a nice Windrake. The really exciting part of this build is whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, draw a card. So when she first got printed back in Kaldheim about a year ago, I designed a deck for her because the idea of incentivizing casting spells from places that aren't your hand. So casting spells from exile, like with Foretell or Suspend, or Rebound, casting things from your graveyard, like with Jumpstart or Flashback or Retrace, Disturb now. The idea of incentivizing casting these weird spells from weird places, I really like that idea. I just thought that the actual incentive, drawing a card, was a little boring. Didn't excite me too much in terms of the payoffs. So I designed a deck for her when Kaldheim came out. I just filled it with all the Suspend and Flashback and Foretell. I think within the context of Kaldheim, I think that she's specifically about Foretell. She's a Kaldheim card. So that was fun. But I never ended up putting in the deck together because I thought that, just drawing a bunch of cards was going to be kind of boring. What I did put together from Kaldheim was Firja, the Judge of Valor. And I think I have a deck tech for that out somewhere as well. I've sort of lost track of what I have and haven't done. But I put Firja together and I played around with Firja. Firja has a similar thing where there's this trigger whenever you cast a spell for the second time each turn. You get to look at the top 3 and put 1 into your hand. So it's a similarly rewarding, putting cards into your hand for doing silly stuff kind of mechanic. And I put Firja together, and I played a couple games with Firja, and I absolutely love Firja. And the thing, you just get rewarded for doing what you were otherwise going to be doing anyway. Like you're casting spells, you're putting creatures onto the field, you're doing spells, you're engaging with the table, and it's giving you gas. So Firja and Vega are similar in that way, and I absolutely fell in love with the way that Firja plays. It's a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be, and that caused me to come back and revisit Vega, and so this is my build for Vega. As I said, we'll leave Vega right here, right in the dragon's mouth. As I said, the basic plan, I think the intention for Vega within the context of Kaldheim was Foretell cards. So Foretell is this cool mechanic where you can, instead of casting the spell from your hand, you can pay 2 mana to put this card face down in exile, and then from there you can cast it for its Foretell cost later. And the Foretell cost is usually a little less than the casting cost, so it's a way to spread the casting cost of the spell across a couple turns if you want to do that. I thought it was a pretty neat mechanic. I had fun with it in Limited. And importantly for Vega, it puts the card in exile, and you're casting it from there, which means it's going to trigger Vega, draw your cards. In this deck, it's really cool because it provides you these like discounts. So these are sort of the basic body creatures. This is a 3/3 flyer. This is a 3/6 with vigilance. They're the combined pay 2 to foretell it and then pay 4 to cast it. For each of them, the combined foretell cost and foretell tax, I guess, this 2. the combined thing equals their mana cost, so you're not really getting any discounts. You're just sort of splitting up the cost across a couple turns. But I think that that's going to be very strong in this deck. I've never played this deck. I haven't even goldfished it yet. I literally just put it together. But I think, my suspicion, is that this deck is going to have so many cards in its hand all the time that you're just going to be constantly pitching these cards into Foretell, into Suspend, that you can take them out later. I think you're going to be really maximizing your mana usage every turn all the time with this Foretell ability. And like, these bodies aren't nothing. They're solid. This guy's just another body. He's cool because his Foretell cost is 0. When you put something into the Foretell zone and then cast it, you have to cast it on a later turn. So you pay 2 to Foretell this guy, and then next turn you can put him into play for 0, which I think is pretty cool. He's another body. He triggers Vega. That's what we want. Doomscar Oracle is another nice Foretell body. And again, he has this thing where total cost of foretelling and then casting is the same as his regular casting cost. So you're not really getting a discount. You're just splitting it up. But he's a 3/2 body. When you cast your second spell each turn, you gain 2 life. We'll be doing that a lot, so I think this card is actually going to be a real crazy powerhouse. We got some tricks that foretell. This is a brief anthem for foretelling it for 3 mana. Lets you get a +1/+2 to your board at instant speed. This is a nice little piece of removal. It'll deal 5 damage to a tapped creature, and the foretell cost on that is only 1. So you can tuck it away for that 2 mana and just bring these guys out when you need them. Here's the rest of the removal there. Raven form got talked about a lot when it got spoiled. This is exiling a creature or artifact, and the apology for that is they get a 1/1 little bird token, which is fine. We're okay giving people things. This card would have been absurdly, obnoxiously, crazy, huge impact on Pauper if it was an instant. It's a sorcery, so it's not unreasonably good, but it is very good. It's versatile removal. We like that. Depart the Realm will bounce a thing, and both of these foretell for 1. So again, you can just tuck these away, bring them out when you need them, draw cards off Vega for using them. Behold the Multiverse is the foretell card that did have a big impact on Pauper EDH, I think. This is just scry 2, then draw 2 at instant speed, and it foretells for 2 mana. So this card is fantastic, especially when you draw an extra card off of it. The companion piece to foretelling is Suspending. We got a couple more bodies here. Suspend lets you pay the suspend cost from your hand, and then you exile it with that many suspend counters on it, time counters. And you take a counter off during each of your upkeeps, and when the last counter comes off, you can cast it for free, and if it's a creature, it gains haste. So you could just cast this as a 3/1 for 5 mana with Shadow. That's not good. No, we're never going to do that. You could cast this as a 4 mana 2/2 flying, flanking. No one's going to do that. For each of these cards, we're going to pay 1 mana or 2 mana to suspend them with a couple counters, and then 2 turns later, 3 turns later, however long it takes, we cast them for free with haste, and because we're casting them for free from exile, Vega's going to draw off cards. Here's some more bodies that have Suspend. This is just a 4/4 flyer. Normally costs 7. It's kind of unreasonable, but we can suspend it for 2 and get it in play 4 turns later. This is a 1/2 that pumps itself for white mana. Normally costs 4. We can suspend it for 3 turns for 1 mana. And again, the beauty of the Suspend cards and the Foretell cards together is that we're always going to have a full grip. We're always going to have plays to make and stuff to do. And being able to just get these guys eventually by pitching them into exile for really cheap and then just having them later is a huge benefit to us. We are very excited to have basically as much Suspend as possible. We have another Anthemish card with Suspend. Suspend 5 is kind of rough. If you draw this guy late game, you might not want to suspend him. But anytime you don't have to draw him turn 1 for him to be good. You can suspend him in the mid game, and then he'll show up in the late game, and he'll have a big impact. This is a 3/3 or a 5 mana 3/3 that gives your whole board +1/+1 when it enters. So he's pretty good. These are the two cards that are very telegraphed beatings. This guy's a 1-mana suspend for 5 turns, so he's very much like the Knight of Old Benalia. You spend 1 mana and you get him 5 turns later. When this guy comes into play, he's going to tap all non-white creatures. This guy makes for a really good sort of alpha strike maneuver where you can just send everyone, because hopefully everyone's creatures are all tapped. Veiling Oddity comes into play. This one's unique in that it has an ability that only triggers if it came into play off of Suspend. This is an illusion that if that happens, your whole board becomes unblockable. So this is the one that we're just never ever going to cast. We're never going to want a 4-mana 2/3 body that does nothing. We're always going to want to suspend this for 2 mana, 4 turns later. We get a 2/3 with haste and our whole board becomes unblockable. So that's kind of cool. The other way we're going to cast spells from exile is with the Rebound mechanic. Rebound is this fantastic mechanic originally from the Zendikar block, I think, where you cast the instant or sorcery once, and it resolves like normal, and then it exiles itself, and at the start of your next upkeep, it casts itself again from exile for free. So these are instants and sorceries. We're going to cast them from our hand for their normal casting cost, and they're not going to trigger Vega. But then on the next turn, they cast themselves a second time and from exile, and then they do trigger Vega. So these are going to be really good. Ephemerate will flicker a creature. This is really good protection. We don't have a ton of ETBs that we're going to abuse, so this is mostly just a way to dodge removal. This will make something unblockable, +1/+0. This is really good for Scare Tillers. We'll talk about Scare Tiller later. Center Soul and Emergence Gaze are almost the exact same card. One of them just costs a little bit more mana. Both of them will give a creature protection from the color of your choice, which is good for us. This is, again, this will help us dodge removal. I think people are going to try to murk the bird often because she's pretty powerful. So this will help us dodge that removal, and then on the next turn they cast themselves again, and they can make things unblockable, maybe. So, and then they draw us cards. They're very good. Survival Cache is going to draw us cards for having life, and then draw us cards for rebounding. So Survival Cache probably is going to draw us 3 cards. Once when we cast it normally, once when we cast it off of Vega on the rebound, and then the rebound also draws us a card here. That's very good. Ojutai's Breath is a weird sort of removal thing. It's not actually going to take a creature off the board, but it will tap a creature and not let it untap. So this is going to be a cute way for us to like get some damage in, maybe tapped on a blocker, or if there's a creature that has a tap ability that's really bothering us, we can turn that off for a turn. These are all good cards that we sort of just want to be casting anyway, and then having them cast themselves again for free and draw us cards to replace themselves is very powerful. So these are all the cards that we're going to cast from exile to get the Vega triggers. Next up, we're going to talk about the cards we'll cast from the graveyard for Vega triggers. And we're going to start with these 3. Think Twice and Deep Analysis are pretty famous cards. I hope maybe they don't need an introduction. They're just very reliable, very utilitarian card draw. This one's just draw a card. This one's draw 2 cards. This is scry 2 and draw a card, scour all possibilities. All of them have flashback costs, so we can do that again. And when we do it again, we'll draw extra cards off of Vega. I'm honestly not sure if I need all 3 of these in the deck yet. We're going to do some playtesting and find out. I'm expecting probably not to want to flash this back for 5. I expect to go into the late game with a full grip, having lots of other things to do in my hand, and not needing extra cards in it, and not wanting to spend 5 mana on that. But we'll see. I want to do some experiments with it before I discount it entirely. These 2 cards are really super incredible for us because they sort of fuel themselves. Each of these has flashback, so we can cast them from the graveyard. And each of these lets us put the top 3 cards of our library into our graveyard. So we have enough flashback and Jumpstart and Retrace and Disturb, and like we have enough spells we can cast from the graveyard that we want to be doing a little bit of self-mill. We want to be putting the cards there without having to cast them first, and these will help us do that. So they're very strong, and when they draw cards, it's just better. We have some goofy removal over here. Spirit Flare is an older one. You can tap an untapped creature you control to deal that creature's power to an attacking or blocking creature. That costs 4, and then it flashes back for 3. It was actually part of a cycle with Deep Analysis. Every color got a common that had a flashback cost of like 2 mana and 3 life. Deep Analysis was originally from Torment as well. This is the reprint. So yeah, and then Silent Departure will bounce a creature. Flashback is really expensive on this. We'll see whether or not the Silent Departure is good in this deck. I'm not sure. Brave Distortion, another card that's just wildly overcosted. This is a disenchant or a naturalize, just destroy an artifact or an enchantment, which you may remember usually costs 2 mana as an instant. This one costs 4 and then flashes back for 6. So it feels pretty bad, and I might cut it. It's very expensive, but I feel like this deck does need an amount of artifact and enchantment removal, and it's one card will kill 2 things eventually, maybe, and draw a card. Maybe it's good. I don't know. We'll find out together. Embolden is a cute little way to protect creatures with really beautiful art. I stand for Rebecca Guay at every possible opportunity. It'll just prevent 4 damage to anything we want, and then we can flash it back, prevent another 4 damage. This is a good way to prevent Vega from dying to lightning bolts or rolling thunders or screds. So maybe this will help. Maybe it's not useful. Momentary Blink and Prismatic Strands are more ways that we can protect our creatures from dying from things. Momentary Blink is like an Ephemerate, where it'll flicker a creature and bring it back. This one has Flashback instead of Rebound. The Flashback is expensive, but getting to choose when it happens is a lot more versatile than Ephemerates, so we like Momentary Blink a lot. Prismatic Strands will prevent all damage that sources of the color of your choice would deal. So if you're getting attacked by 6 red creatures, you can just prevent all of that damage. It's kind of crazy because you can still block with your white and blue creatures and then only prevent the damage from the red sources. This will also prevent you or save you from like fireballs and things. Prismatic Strands is a very strong card, and it flashes back. The flashback cost doesn't involve mana. We can just tap creatures to pay that if we're all tapped out of mana. That's an incredible card. Next, we have some ways to make our creatures bigger. Marshalling Cry is our third sort of anthem effect in the deck that's going to make all of our creatures bigger, which is important if we have a lot of creatures. And I'll talk in a moment about how we're going to get a lot of creatures. But Homestead Courage I think is really cute. I like that it's really cheap. I'm gonna keep saying this over and over, but I'm expecting to have a very full hand. I'm expecting to be playing lots of spells each turn. So like keeping them really cheap, making sure that they cost 1 mana to use and to trigger Vega is important to me. This isn't much of an effect, but it's going to replace itself, and it's going to give me a 3/3 flying vigilant bird, and that seems good. We like Homestead Courage. So let me leave the Marshalling Cry there, and let's talk about how we're going to get a token army. So this is Battle Screech. For 4 mana, you get 2 white birds. You can tap 3 creatures and flash it back to get 2 more white birds. So this one card creates 4 flyers for us. That Marshalling Cry can make them all +1/+1 and Vigilant. And we have the other cards in here as well. Warhorn Blast and Knight of New Benalia. These are our other anthem effects. So these are the 3 anthems. They're going to go with the cards like Battle Screech. And Battle Screech is going to go with cards like Sen's Enlistment. So let's talk about Retrace for a minute. Retrace is a little bit like Flashback, where it lets you cast the spell from the graveyard. It's just that the cost is the usual casting cost plus discarding a land from your hand. And I think I'm going to have plenty of lands in my hand to discard, which makes Sen's Enlistment a powerhouse of a card. You can just play this over and over and over and over again. When you flash back a spell, it goes into exile. You can only flash it back once, and then it's gone forever. But with Retrace, you cast it from your graveyard, it goes back into your graveyard. You can cast it again from your graveyard, as often as you have lands. And every time you do that, Vega's going to give you another card in your hand, so she should be fueling this land plan pretty effectively. Speaking of Retrace, we have Una's Grace as well. This will turn every land with Vega into instant speed divination. So anytime you draw a land and you don't want it, you discard it to cast Una's Grace, 3 mana, instant speed. Una's Grace draws you a card, Vega draws you a card. You've just turned your land into 2 cards. And then, now that the land is in your graveyard, you attack with Scaretiller. It's so good. Scaretiller and Retrace is going to be kind of absurdly powerful, I think. I'm very excited about Scaretiller and Retrace together. We'll come back to Scaretiller. He's part of the ramp category. Speaking of cards you can cast from your graveyard that don't exile themselves, we need to talk about Escape. Sentinel's Eyes is another one of these cards like Homestead Courage where on the surface the advantage it gives you seems very small. This is an enchantment for +1/+1 and Vigilance. But you can cast this from your graveyard just by spending a white mana and exiling 2 other cards. So you can cast this over and over again. If the thing you cast this on keeps dying, that's fine. You can just bring back the Sentinel's Eyes over and over again. You draw a card every time. This is kind of crazy good. Sleep of the Dead similarly has an escape cost. Costs 3 mana to escape this and exiling 3 cards from your graveyard. But you get to tap a creature and it doesn't untap. There's a couple of these effects in here. The tap things don't untap. I think it's probably pretty powerful, just being able to do it repeatedly. It's not a permanent solution to creatures attacking you. It's definitely a temporary solution, but in a deck this value-oriented and grindy, I think it'll get us there. These cards are the Jumpstart cards. They're a little bit like Flashback, where you can cast them once from the graveyard and then they exile themselves. So a little bit worse than the Flashback, or a little bit worse than the Escape guys and the Retrace guys that you can just cast from your graveyard over and over again as long as you've got the resources. These only cast from your graveyard once, but this will let you draw a card. This will give something +1/+1 and flying. Honestly, neither of them is very exciting, except for the fact that they draw us extra cards off Vega, which is good. It's also important to note that these give us some of our only discard outlets in the deck. With Retrace, you have to discard lands. So you're not going to get any value out of the flashback cards, like putting a flashback card into your graveyard to cast that later. That's not going to work. You can't discard a Madness card that way, because there are no Madness lands. These guys, these 2 Jumpstart guys, these will give us an outlet for those flashback spells to just put those in the graveyard, give us an outlet for the Madness spells. So there's actually a lot more utility buried in here than it originally looks like. So these are pretty solid. Next up we have the Miscellaneous section. I mentioned Madness. Madness does trigger Vega, because Madness is a replacement effect. If you would discard it, you discard it into exile, and then the next time you have priority, you can, or maybe it's not even priority. Next time state-based actions are checked, you can cast it from exile, or put it in the graveyard like normal. So if you're casting it using the Madness ability, it does trigger Vega because it's being cast not from your hand but for exile. So that's nice. This is the only Madness card. Again, we only have the 2 outlets for it here with the Jumpstart. Jumpstart's the only way we have to discard things. So I don't think it's going to be very reliable, but even if we don't put it together with the Jumpstart cards to Madness it, it's a really cheap little cantrip. You look at the top 2. 1 goes into your graveyard, which is a good way to bury a flashback spell down there. 1 goes into your hand, so it replaces itself. Not a bad card to cast normally, and sometimes we'll hit it off the Jumpstart and get an extra card off Vega. So that's neat. Disturb is our newest cast from the graveyard mechanic. This just came out in Crimson Vow and Midnight Hunt. I only have one of the Disturb cards in here. Honestly, I think most of them are pretty bad. Like there's like a Hippogriff that you can disturb for 5 mana. I don't want to spend 5 mana for a 2/2 flyer, even if it draws me a card. Like at that point, I'd rather just play Mole Drifter, and I'm not even playing Mole Drifter in this deck. I think I'm gonna have enough card draw. So I am playing Lunarch Veteran, which is Soul Sibling. Gives you a life whenever a creature comes into play under your control. We can disturb him, so once he dies, we can cast him from the graveyard for 2 mana, and then he comes to play as the Spirit guy, who is like a reverse Soul Sibling. He gives us life when a creature leaves the battlefield. And he flies, which is kind of cute. So he's not bad. The reason I chose this over any of the other disturb spells is that I wanted to be able to like flicker this with like momentary blink. If you flicker it, it comes back face up, and then you can let it die again and then disturb it again for more cards, which I think is pretty cute. I'm running a disturb card at all, mostly just because I wanted to put at least one representative of each mechanic that triggers Vega into this deck. So that's why there's a Madness card. Madness isn't good in this deck. It's honestly pretty terrible because only 2 outlets. But I wanted there to be at least one card that represented each mechanic available in PDH to trigger Vega. So this is my Madness card. This is my Disturb card. This is my Adventure card. Again, we have this effect of tapping something and it doesn't tap down. So if you cast the Adventure side of this, you get that little spell effect for 2 mana, which is kind of nice. And then you exile the card, and later you can cast the creature half of it from exile, and casting the creature half triggers Vega. So Queen of the Ice is our other tap down effect. I ended up putting 2 cards from the Cipher pool. Last Thoughts just seems really, really good. This is 4 mana for draw a card. When you cast this from your hand, you exile this attached to a creature you control, like Scaretiller or Vega. And then it sort of functions like a weird, it's not exactly an aura, because it's not exactly attached. It's encoded, so you can't interact with this card. It's exiled and like connected to a card, to one of your creatures. And then for the rest of that creature's existence on the field, anytime that creature damages a player, you get to cast a copy of this spell. So the copy gets created in exile. Copies are always created in the same place that the original lives. So if the original is exiled, encoded, the copy is created in exile, and you cast the encoded card without paying the mana cost. So yeah, if you encode Last Thoughts on Vega, and then attack with Vega, you cast the copy, which triggers Vega to draw a card, and then the copy resolves, which draws you another card. So this lets you attack to draw 2 cards, which seems kind of crazy. Hands of Binding still has this Cipher ability where you cast it, and then it encodes itself, and every time that creature connects, you get to cast a copy for free. So these copies will also trigger Vega to draw us a card, and the effect on this is that it taps a creature which doesn't untap. So I guess there's 4 of those in the deck. We have Queen of Ice, Hands of Binding, Ojutai's Breath, and the escape one, Sleep of the Dead. So you got 4 of these guys, which I think is neat. It's a nice little sub-theme. The last mechanic we have here that triggers Vega is honestly, I think, kind of the worst mechanic that triggers Vega, and that's Madness, or not Madness, Cascade. Cascade is bad, but it's really, really fun. The Cascade mechanic works where when you cast this spell, you get to look at cards from the top of your library, or not look at, remove them from the game. Exile cards from the top of your library until you hit a spell that costs less than the Cascade card. And you get to cast that spell from exile for free. So again, it's going to trigger Vega. It's probably going to do a weird thing. We don't know. Like maybe you Forceful Denial into an Arcane Denial, and that's you're countering your own counterspell, but that's sort of fine. We can work with that. Maelstrom Colossus is just big. This will cascade into anything in the deck, which is fun. Forceful Denial is a counterspell, and Stormcaller's Boon is an enchantment that lets us, we can sacrifice it to give all our creatures flying. So if we have a lot of tokens from Sen's Enlistment or something, we can make them all fly. So this, combined with the Veiling Oddity and the Ivory Giant, is like a third way we have of sort of alpha striking all of our tokens in, making them sort of pseudo unblockable. I think it's cute. I don't think it's good, but I'm going to have fun with it. This, everything we just talked about, is 50 cards that trigger Vega. That's pretty much the whole deck. There's more deck out here, but it's basically just lands and a couple utility cards. So let's talk about the utility cards. I do have Arcane Denial in here because if I'm going to cascade into a counterspell, I want to be able to cast the counterspell targeting the thing that was cascading. So like if I Stormcaller's Boon and hit Arcane Denial off the Cascade, I want to be able to use Arcane Denial to counter Stormcaller's Boon and then draw 3 cards off of Arcane Denial on my next upkeep and then draw a 4th one for cascading. Like that's... It always feels bad when you cascade into a counterspell, unless it's Arcane Denial, and then it feels great. So that's a good counterspell to be running. I do want to run a little bit of counter magic because I'm worried that Vega is going to draw some hate. People are going to try and disrupt my board, and I want to stop that. These guys are also going to help stop people from disrupting my board. Confound will counterspell that targets a creature and then draw me a card. Hindering Light that will counterspell that targets me or a permanent and then draw me a card. So these are very defensive, anti-removal counter spells that replace themselves. So we like that. We have a couple fogs in here so that no one gets too cheeky with their attacks. Dawn Charm can fog or regenerate a creature, so that's another good way to protect Vega. Or it can counter a spell that targets you. So it can stop attacks, it can stop fireballs, and it can stop removal. Dawn Charm is a powerhouse. Riot Control is just a fog, but it will gain me a lot of life. We take those in case of emergency. This is my entire removal suite. It is very sparse. We have 2 pieces of Apology removal. Both of these will just destroy or exile any creature and then leave the recipient with a 1/1 creature as an apology. Forsake the Worldly I just really like as a utility card. It'll exile an artifact or enchantment, or it'll cycle for 2. If you don't have any good artifact or enchantment targets, you can just pitch it for a card. It's very versatile. I think Forsake the Worldly is a powerhouse of a card. It's one of my white staples. Our ramp suite is pretty slim. We have Everflowing Chalice. I consider it to be like a 2-drop rock. Maybe sometimes it's a 4-drop rock that taps for 2. Azorius Signet and Arcane Signet are the other 2-drop rocks that each tap for 1. They're very useful. This felt like enough of a grindy, last forever, slowly accumulate value kind of deck that I really want the life gain off Pristine Talisman. I think that over the course of a game, this rock might gain me 10 life. Bonder's Ornament, I don't suspect that I'm ever going to really activate Bonder's Ornament to draw a card. I think that my card draw needs are going to be well met in the command zone. But I do want to have a rock in play in case other people start activating Bonder's Ornaments. I want to have mine around. Scare Tiller, of course, is the other part of my removal suite. He's going to be really fantastic with the what is it? Retrace? Not Rebound. Retrace. He's going to be really good with the Retrace spells, the things that make us discard lands. He's also going to be really good with those 2 mill spells I showed you earlier, Dream Twist and Otherworldly Gaze. So if we mill some lands, Scare Tiller can get them back for us. Scare Tiller is also really unreasonably good with these guys. I've been sort of running this as my Scare Tiller package a lot. Terramorphic and E-Wilds will sacrifice themselves to put lands into play, and then Scare Tiller will put these back into play in a delicious cycle of value forever. These are also really good with Scare Tiller. These are the 4 cycle lands. These guys cycle for a single colored mana. These guys cycle for 2 colorless mana. So they're nice little land drops if you need them. They can cycle for cards if you don't need them, and then Scare Tiller can put them back into play. These are the other non-basics. We have Azorius Chancery, taps for 2. I really like the Chancery in decks that are going to be really mana intensive because it's mana per card efficient, if not time efficient. Opal Palace and Command Tower are going to give us colored mana and sometimes make Vega really big if she gets removed a lot. She flies, so making her big is fine. The rest of the deck is basics. I'm running 13 of each basic. And that's it. That's the deck. We're going to cast Vega. We're going to trigger her 50 times with my 50 spells that trigger Vega. And get some value. We're just going to get rewarded for playing the game. Never ever run out of gas. Keep doing things. Keep a handful. Cast 3 or 4 spells a turn. It's going to be pretty sweet. I hope you like it.